You're listening to the Tax Insights Podcast, where the professionals at Hawkins Ash CPAs break down complex tax topics into bite-sized how-tos. If you operate a gig business on the side, your personal and business finances can quickly become a knotted mess. In this episode, Jeff Dvorachek, a tax partner, shares best practices for business expense tracking.
Today, I want to focus in on advice, broadly speaking, for businesses. What can small businesses start to do today to start planning for taxes for next year?
Yeah, so let's talk kind of small businesses, maybe gig type businesses. I think the number one thing that we see in gig businesses is that people are really good at knowing how much income they made, but they're not really good at keeping track of their expenses because they just kind of consider this to be a side business. So that would be my number one recommendation, is really keep track of all of your expenses. And also, if you work out of your home, you can also take a deduction for part of your home expenses.
Sure. So what is the best way or method of actually keeping track of those records or those expenses? Are we talking about just throwing all those receipts in a shoebox, or are we talking about other things like, what do you recommend?
Yeah, what I really like to have people do is, even if they have a small business, just set up a checking account, a savings account, and a credit card that's just under that business's name, and use those things just for the business. Because then it's much easier to keep track of, rather than, going through personal credit card records or going through personal bank statements.
Right.
And the other thing is, you can save receipts, but those tend to still get lost. So like I said, if you use your business account for everything, it makes it really easy to track at the end of the year.
Yeah. And not only that, but I would imagine you don't necessarily want someone to come on in with a shoebox full of receipts, put it on your desk and say, hey, here you go. I would imagine that's kind of complicated and overwhelming as well, too.
You're exactly right. Yeah, because that trip to Walmart, who knows what it's actually for unless they tell us what it's for.
Right. So then I guess let me ask you this, and maybe this is more an in-depth question here, but how does a business owner or an individual who has a side hobby, business, or whatnot, how do they really justify, or how can they justify what is in the business expense? Can they just write off everything in life because everything is a business expense?
Right. So what I usually tell people is that, when you look at an expense, if you would have not done that expense, if you didn't have the business, then it's probably a deductible expense. So, there's things like, incremental costs of insurance. And like I said before, home offices and trips to the post office, or mileage on vehicles. There's just a lot of different things that if you didn't have your business, you wouldn't have done. So those are probably deductible expenses. Now, can you get away with, all kinds of other personal expenses and run those through the business? Probably not. But if it's a legitimate expense, absolutely it should be counted.
Yeah, and I think that's where it is important to set yourself up for success and surround yourself with experts such as Hawkins Ash, because you guys can give good advice and counsel for individuals to let them know, hey, that's probably not a business expense. Let's probably not go that route. But I would also imagine it's better to be safe than sorry and keep everything and then have that conversation with you afterwards.
That's right. Yeah, it's easier for us to say yes to an expense that we know about, rather than, if we don't know about the expense, we can't figure out if it is business or not.
Sure. So great advice, listeners, here each and every week on Tax Insight. Jeff, time goes by quickly. If listeners and business owners want to connect with you and they need to connect with you, what's the best way of reaching out to Hawkins Ash?
I would go right to our website, which is hawkinsash.cpa.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you for your time, sir. We'll talk to you next week.
This has been Tax Insights, presented by Hawkins Ash CPAs. Learn more online at hawkinsashcpas.com. Hawkins Ash CPAs, part of your business, part of your life.